We're going to have some real substance, but we're also going to have some great theater. So I hope that in the spirit of theater, you will all turn off your cell phones, your pagers, your phones, and everything else that's electronic and that can beep. I know our speakers will appreciate it, and I'd like to see that happen. So I'm Jessica Einhorn, I'm Dean of SAIS, and I thank you all for joining us this evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you, the students, the alumni, the friends and faculty, to celebrate the book launch of our distinguished professor of American Foreign Policy, Michael Mandelbaum, here with his esteemed co-author, New York Times columnist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Thomas Friedman. It's a great pleasure to welcome Tom back to the SAIS podium. Those of you who are loyal readers of Tom Friedman's column, and I know that includes a lot in this audience, already know of the friendship of our two authors. They seem to have the best of bonds, based on intellectual respect and activated by their mutual pleasure in finding ways to explain the world's problems through brilliant writing. That is both understandable and entertaining to the layman and expert alike. I greatly enjoyed this most recent book, which combines so much of what we have admired in each of them before. As I told Professor Mandelbaum, my only regret was that I did not start underlining all the best metaphors and turns of phrase from chapter 1 onwards. I think we should sponsor a web-based event with competition for the top 10, and I know that we'd have at least 50 entries. In my reading, That Used to Be Us is a presidential platform waiting to be adopted and shared with the wider public. As you know from their last chapter, or perhaps you don't know, but as you'll discover, our authors are not necessarily expecting either major party to seize on the real agenda before us, and perhaps we'll hear more about their hopes for how electoral change will take place in the form of a third name on the ballot at this important juncture in our history. But you've come here to spend as much time as possible with our dynamic duo, so let me begin the program with an introduction of my colleague, Professor Michael Mandelbaum, and he in turn will introduce his friend and co-author. Professor Mandelbaum is the Christian A. Herter Professor, a founder of the School of American Foreign Policy, and the director of the American Policy Program at SAIS. He's one of America's leading authorities on international affairs and is known for his extraordinary ability to explain with great clarity the meaning and the consequence of complex global developments and trends. The World Affairs Council of America named him one of the most influential people in American foreign policy. He's the author of co-author of over a dozen books. Just in the last 10 years, he began with The Ideas That Conquered the World, Peace, Democracy, and Free Markets in the 21st Century, which has been translated into 7 languages, including Arabic and Chinese. And The Frugal Superpower, his 12th book, the one before this one, was published in 2010. Professor Mandelbaum and Professor Friedman, welcome, and Professor Mandelbaum, the podium is yours.
Well, thank you. We are going to do a sequential duet, and I'm going to speak second, so let me introduce the first speaker. I'll be brief because to this SAIS audience, and I think to our C-SPAN audience as well, he really needs no introduction. My friend and co-author, Thomas L. Friedman, is the foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times. He's a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner. He is the author of 5 previous books, all extremely influential, all bestsellers, including From Beirut to Jerusalem and The World is Flat. Tom, it's a pleasure to welcome you to SAIS. The floor is yours.
Michael, thank you very much. It's am I on here? The trainer is on. Can you all hear me? It's great to be back here at SAIS. Jessica, thank you for having us, and thank you for attending. I didn't know I was a professor, but I am now, and I'm going to keep that and pocket it. So What Michael and I are going to do, as he said, is a sequential duet. We're going to kind of break up the book. This is how we wrote it, and try to give you a basic overview, and then we look forward to taking questions. Now, when we've been on the road for a few weeks now, and whenever people hear the title of our book, that used to be us, the first thing they ask is, but does it have a happy ending? And we tell everybody it absolutely does. We just don't know whether it's fiction or nonfiction. That really depends on us. Now, you might ask, how did two foreign policy wonks end up writing a book about domestic American politics and policy? And the answer, as Jessica hinted, is that Michael and I are old friends, and we are neighbors out in Bethesda. And we've basically been having a 20-year running conversation about foreign policy, often interrupted with, honey, I'm on the phone with Michael. Can you just wait a second? And we started to notice something in the last couple of years. We would start out every conversation talking about the world, but we would end every conversation talking about America. And we basically realized after a while that America, its fate, future, vigor, and vitality, really is the biggest foreign policy issue in the world. And unless we really tackled that and thought that through, we really couldn't think clearly about foreign policy. Michael and I are both American nationalists. We really do believe that America plays a pivotal role in holding up the global system. We are the tent pole that holds up the world, for better and for worse, and we think for most of the time, and in most places, for much better. We provide enormous global governance for the world, and Michael's written about that in his last book. But we are convinced that if this tent pole buckles or frays, your kids won't just grow up in a different America. They'll grow up in a different world. They'll grow up in a fundamentally different world if we cannot provide the American dream for another generation. After all, when Britain went into decline, America was there to pick up the pieces and really provide that global governance. And if we now go into decline, who is there to pick up the pieces? So Michael and I are movie buffs, Michael in particular, actually. And we have a lot of movie references in the book. And there's one in particular that really captures for us kind of the pivotal moment we're at. It's from that 1958 classic Touch of Evil, starring Orson Welles. A movie about murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, and corruption in a town on the Mexican-American border. Welles, as you recall, plays a crooked cop who tries to frame his Mexican counterpart for murder. At one point, Welles stumbles into a brothel and finds the proprietor, Marlene Dietrich, who is also a fortune teller with cards spread out in front of her. "Read my future for me," Welles says. "You haven't got any," she replies. "Your future is all used up." It was really that fear about our own country that prompted us to write this book. Now let me jump right to the conclusion. We do not believe that is the case. We certainly don't believe it is inevitable. But it was out of concern about our future right now and how we think it through and how we do what is necessary to make sure it is not all used up that brought Michael and I to write this book. And so let me just share with you the first few paragraphs because it really frames the whole book. The opening chapter is called, "If You See Something, Say Something." This is a book about America that begins in China. In September 2010, Tom attended the World Economic Forum Summer Conference in Tianjin. 5 years earlier, getting to Tianjin had involved a 3.5-hour car ride from Beijing to a polluted, crowded Chinese version of Detroit. But things had changed. Now to get to Tianjin, you head to the Beijing South Railway Station, an ultra-modern flying saucer of a building with glass walls and an oval roof covered with 3,246 solar panels. You buy a ticket from an electronic kiosk offering choices in Chinese and English, and you board a world-class high-speed train that makes the trip 72 miles in 29 minutes. The conference itself took place at the Tianjin Meijing Convention